So, hello. We're here today with David Greene, who is going to be doing the first interview in our series of interview with the Young Lawyers Committee of the CLA. Hello, David.
Hello, Darshani.
David, we'd like to ask you a few questions today, but before that, could you please tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. I am Vice President of the Law Society of England and Wales, and I'm due to become President in October. But I'm also a Senior Partner of a firm in Lincoln's Inn, Edwin Coe, and I have worked throughout the Commonwealth on dispute resolution and indeed on civil justice and human rights for the past, I'm frightened to say, over 30 years.
All right. So, David, we had a few questions prepared for you before, but as you know, we've switched the angle a little bit to match the current times and the current circumstances we're living in. So we're going to focus a little bit on what everybody's talking about today, which is the COVID-19 pandemic and the effects the lockdown has had on the legal profession. So, were you at all able to anticipate the challenges the legal profession would face due to a lockdown? You, obviously, as you said, you're a senior partner of a law firm, and in terms of the Law Society.
Well, I'll start with the Law Society to say is that actually this is the moment for law societies. We're here to help members, to help the profession. We've got our public interest duties, and this in a way is the time that law societies step up to the plate to deal with all of the issues that arise. The Law Society of England and Wales actually had a fire in its main building, I'm trying to think, February or something of that nature, and we had to do some refurbishments, and that meant that quite a lot of the staff had to work remotely, so we were sort of ready for that. And had some training of it, so we were able to deal with that pretty quickly. As a firm, I'm not sure anyone was ready for it. I think it depended how prepared you were for remote working and flexible working. We were able, and in fact, obviously it's promoted the use of flexible working and remote working, and I think that when we talk about the future, I think that's going to have a pretty permanent effect. You're on mute, Darshani.
Sorry about that. So what changed?
No, I have to say, as I'm going to say, is that the mute button is the sort of new reply all button or autofill button that often challenges us.
Yes, it's a bit better than the putting a new background, as you're speaking, but
indeed, yes.
Yes. What changes do you think COVID-19 has brought about for the legal profession and the justice process as a whole? And in your opinion, which of these do you think will be long-term?
Well, I think that, as I say, in relation to my own firm, it has pushed along the use of flexible working and remote working, and I think that will have a permanent effect. And when I talk to people as Vice President of the Law Society throughout the profession, we talk about that being a permanent effect, so that people will no longer feel the necessity to travel into work. And in any event, travel is going to have difficulties for quite some time, so that I think we will change how the profession works. I think the one thing is that firms have placed a lot of trust in remote working, that they've been forced to, and I think that has changed attitudes within the profession, so I think we'll see more of that. I think as law societies, and indeed, I think in practice, I think we'll travel less. I think that we have found actually that meetings can be held remotely very easily. And indeed, here we are doing something remote very easily. And of course, it opens you up to audiences. I did a webinar the other day with 1,500 people on it, and very easy, no problem at all. But getting 1,500 people into a hall at some point would be very, very difficult, and all those air miles that are used up. So I think that we will see things change in that respect in the future, and I'm pretty sure we will travel less. So I think that's the permanent. We shouldn't, obviously we're in the middle of a crisis, so we shouldn't jump to conclusions about what will happen. I think that will be the major change, and I think it will be a change from the way that clients deal with us. I think that will apply throughout the world. It doesn't really matter whether we're Commonwealth or other countries. I think it'll apply throughout the world.
Indeed, it is helping us connect, as I didn't mention, but I'm obviously based not in London. I'm in Mauritius, and you're in London.
Yes, so indeed. Yeah, there we are.
Helps a lot.
Yeah.
In your opinion, will this affect young lawyers, and how?
Well, we have some concerns about young lawyers. In the UK, we have the furloughing of staff, and that's been taken up quite substantially by the profession. The concern is that when that finishes, or the government support for furloughing finishes, we're likely to see quite a lot of redundancies, and the concern is where those redundancies will happen, and will they happen in the junior lawyers or the younger lawyers, and also there will be less jobs in the profession as we go forward, and I think again it's quite possible that the young will be affected. So that's number one. Number two is clearly mental health issues. And that applies to all of us. Issues about mental health and isolation, working alone. Supervision issues arise. We have an obligation to supervise. That is more difficult, it's more challenging when we're working remotely. And also, as we've seen, and I'm just reading a piece about what's happening in the States in relation to exams, and the taking of exams and qualifying, again, this presents difficulties at the moment, and our regulator, the SRA, is working through those. So those are the sort of issues that affect junior lawyers, and I think we're working through those. We in the Law Society have the Junior Lawyers Division, just as here we have Junior CLA. And it's a very substantial, very active division in the Law Society, and we are talking to them and having discussions with them, a dialogue about these issues.
All right. So from what we've seen throughout the world, and obviously throughout the Commonwealth, is the rule of law, in your view, in safe hands with government's responses to the crisis?
Well, the rule of law has a number of challenges. I mean, let's just put COVID to one side. Is that over the recent past, we have seen substantial challenges to the rule of law by certain governments. And the challenge, one of the challenges within the European sector is both in Hungary and in Poland, the two governments there have been seen to be leaning on the judiciary and the independence of the judiciary. Now that's completely separate, but we are seeing the rise of populist movements around the world, and the rule of law actually challenges populist movements because judges, being independent, can sometimes stand in the way, or according to the populists, stand in the way of change that they want to put into effect. And indeed, for the populists, the judiciary are seen as part of the establishment. We've seen, for instance, Donald Trump talk about the establishment and the fact that he is in some way speaking for the people when he challenges the establishment. So I think that's to one side. Now you build on top of that the crisis, in which governments have had to take pretty drastic steps in order to deal with the crisis. We have cooperated. We've been fairly benign. Society's been fairly benign in relation to those drastic steps. Restrictions on liberty, restrictions on the ability to travel, to speak sometimes. All of these have been government responses to what has happened in this crisis. Now, those are almost directly contradictory to principles of the rule of law. Similarly, in relation to access to justice, the courts have closed, finding it very difficult to get back. Access to that justice process is challenged, and indeed, IT, the flexible working, remote working, doesn't provide an answer to that. So that's presented difficulties. What I think as lawyers is our job is to ensure that when it comes to those issues, those temporary steps that have been taken, we ensure that they don't become permanent in some way, that governments aren't using the crisis as a leverage in order to gain power and challenge the rule of law. So it's absolutely vital that we as lawyers stand up for the rule of law in these circumstances. We want to cooperate. We want to ensure that we can deal with the health issues, which are absolutely the most important issue here. But we must keep one eye on the rule of law, access to justice, human rights being confronted by government responses. And I think there are the challenges, and we will have to see over the next few months dealing with those on behalf of the profession, but on behalf of the public.
Yes, and as you mentioned in your introduction, you were going to take on the presidency of the Law Society later this year. So with COVID-19, Brexit before that, and now the hashtag Black Lives Matter, is your agenda at the Law Society being made elsewhere? And how are you going to tackle all of this?
It is, to the extent is that all office holders, and I'm sure it's true in the CLA as anywhere else, come in wanting to achieve something, wanting to do something, and they usually pick up the issues of the time of which they have a passion. And as I say, I've worked in civil justice and human rights for very many years, and indeed within the Commonwealth, I've particularly worked in sub-Saharan Africa. So we try and make our agenda, but history and events somewhat overtake us. And for instance, let's take the rule of law. Previously, our message on the rule of law was to express concern about what governments were doing. Now that has been overtaken by COVID and the response to it. And we need to now address that. So yes, that agenda has been taken over. Black Lives Matter obviously is such a huge issue. It's such a serious issue that we have to ensure that we're addressing it properly. Diversity and inclusion within society and within the profession is such an important subject that we must deal with that, and here it is very much firmly placed on the agenda by recent and sad and unfortunate events to which we must take our objection as lawyers. So that place, and then the other issue for the UK at least is Brexit coming up. That's still we're due to end the transition period at the end of the year. And at the moment, the government is saying we're going to do that. Well, that presents substantial challenges if we don't have a deal at the end of the year. One of the issues we as a society, a law society, is particularly concerned about is the recognition, is jurisdiction and the recognition of judgments, which we have in a European sense. We have the Brussels regulation, that will fall away at the end of the transition period, and we are pressing hard to accede to the Lugano Convention. But it remains to be seen whether the European Union will agree to that. So all of those details of really are unavoidable and certainly encroach, if not take over completely, the office holders' agendas, and we'll see. So I'm president from October till October, so it's a year, and we will see very substantial change in that year.
Indeed. On a more personal note, David, are you still working from home?
Yes, here I am, sitting in front of screens like most practitioners, if not all practitioners. It presents its own difficulties. It has its pluses and its minuses that I think we all know about. One is that you don't have to travel to work, but that means you probably start work early. I get up at about 5 and start then, and I think people generally starting earlier, but it's quite intense. I think the minus is it's quite intense and very difficult to break away from, because it sort of takes over everything. You haven't got that break from coming out of the office, perhaps meeting people in an evening, and then coming home and it's finished. You've got that rather intensity of constant, and that's one of the mental health issues that arises. I'm very lucky. Another challenge is I'm very lucky that I have somewhere I can sit. Here I am, in an office chair, and I've got screens in front of me. I've got the phone here. So I've got all the equipment. But a lot of people don't have that facility. I have heard of people working from ironing boards, working from beds, just balancing things on their knees, and that's not a healthy way to work in any way. And I think firms, companies have to address those issues, and certainly, again, as a law society, we're talking to firms about those issues. So it has its pluses and minuses. As I said at the beginning, I think these are permanent. I think, for instance, I'm sure I will work 2 or 3 days a week from work once we've reopened the office, from home once we've reopened the office. And I think we'll all be the same. I think that working from home will become now the norm. The new normal, I think, is how it is now put. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, David. I'm sure we will speak to you again sometime after October to see how you're coping with your new position at the Law Society. Thank you very much.
I look forward to Darshani, and I'm very happy to have these discussions. And if we want to repeat at some point, only too happy.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.